This is the Avoidant Obsession timeline. And today, I'm going to take you through it so we can pinpoint the exact moment that obsession hits an avoidant. But what makes this timeline unique is it's entirely based on this interview I did with a woman named Lee, who, you guessed it, had her avoidant begging for her back. Now, I don't say this often, but Lee played pretty much everything correct in the post-breakup phase. So let's start at the beginning with stage one, what I'm calling the break. The break is day 0 of the avoidant obsession timeline. This is where the avoidant ends a relationship or pulls away for good. In actuality, this is where the obsession seed starts to get planted. I'm going to play you a clip from an interview I did with Lee so you can see what this actually looks and kind of feels like.
Literally to the point where, keep in mind, when my ex was breaking up with me, I just kept nodding and I was like, okay, whatever you say. I'm not going to fight for this. I'm not going to have to prove myself. If you don't think I'm the person for you, that's it. Okay. Like, okay, that's it. And so then after that, I literally just remember sleeping for like 24 hours straight.
You know, for Lee, her avoidant just kind of dropped the breakup on her. One second she's in a relationship, the next it kind of feels like the rug's been pulled out from under her. But what I actually find wild about this is the very thing she thought was a weakness probably helped her more than anything else. Because instead of panicking, instead of chasing or sending like a single text to beg for him back, she just falls asleep. Now, I'm not saying go take a nap is a great breakup strategy, but in her case, it kind of works like a mirror. When avoidants end things, they're expecting chaos. They expect the begging, the bargaining, the tears, because that reaction reinforces their illusion of control. But when they're met with sort of this calm demeanor, when the person they just left doesn't chase, that's when the first crack forms. And for Lee's ex, that silence probably said, hey, you're free. Do whatever. And paradoxically, that's what plants the seed of obsession, because the avoidant obsession timeline doesn't just start when you cling, it starts the moment you don't, which kind of leads us nicely to stage 2, the silence. The silence usually occurs between days 1 and 7 of the avoidant obsession timeline. It's the week where you disappear and the absence itself starts planting doubt into the avoidant's mind. Now, Lee did the silence stage perfectly. Take a look at this.
And keep in mind that entire time, it had been like a week since we broke up. I went radio silent on social media. Like, I made it to a point where he had to check an obituary to see if I was alive. My friends were not allowed to post me. I didn't add anybody on it. And there was no breadcrumbing.
All right, so for Lee, the silence stage is actually pretty brutal. The first week after the breakup, she doesn't text him, she doesn't post, doesn't really even leave a single breadcrumb for him to grab onto, like she said. Ironically, the silence gets loud really fast. When the avoidant has no way to check in on you, it kind of creates the conditions for their mind to start thinking about you all day. Because remember, they're expecting you to chase them because that's what their experience has taught them. So when you don't, their brain scrambles to kind of make sense of it. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable tension that happens when reality doesn't quite meet expectation. And for avoidance, that tension turns into mental noise. They'll start replaying the breakup, they'll search for clues, they'll wonder why you're not reacting the way every other person in their life did. Now, the irony of the silent stage is that you're nowhere to be found, but in their mind, you're everywhere. It's the first time they realize the breakup might actually be real, and that realization doesn't feel as freeing as they thought it would. So the big lesson with stage 2 is that obsession grows in uncertainty. When you remove access to yourself, you create the space where the avoidance thoughts begin to spiral, and it can actually make them doubt their actions. But let's go back to our timeline here. Actually, before we move on, I want to say something really quick about Lee. She wasn't just some random success story who figured this out by luck. She was actually part of the Reconnection Room, my private coaching community. Inside the Reconnection Room, we do weekly group coaching, live sessions with me and my coaching team where we break down your exact situation, help you figure out what stage your avoidant is in, and give you a step-by-step plan to help you regain your power. And right now, you can join for 50% off, a one-time payment of just $97. And that gets you into all of the coaching calls, every course I've ever made, and access to the full community. So if you've been trying to make sense of your avoidant ex, or you just want to stop feeling stuck in the cycle, this is your place to do it. Simply click the link you see in the description below. All right, let's get back to our timeline. Stage 3 happens around days 7 through 14, and it's where things get a little bit more spicy. I'm calling this the signal. The signal, of course, happens during that second week of the avoidant obsession timeline. It's essentially your reappearance with a high value moment. Now, Lee talks about it more in my interview with her.
It was on a Saturday. So Sunday night, I was like, I'm going to post this photo. And it's this beautiful photo. I'm in a field. I'm laughing. I'm smiling. And I waited till 7:00 at night because I knew that's when everyone's home from the weekend checking things. And I hit post, and literally like the photo, like for my friends, like broke the internet. Everybody's like cheering me on. Everyone's like, yeah, like that's it. Go. Boom. And then I went silent again. And that's when he started breaking.
Now, the funny thing about this is Lee didn't post this to get his attention. She posted it to remind the world, and maybe even a little bit of herself, that she still existed without him. And that single act can change the narrative. For 2 weeks, her avoidant has been living in silence, assuming she was somewhere grieving, maybe waiting, and then suddenly she reappears. She's radiant, she's grounded, she's surrounded by support. This is what psychologists call a disruption cue. It's something that interrupts the brain's pattern of expectation. Her avoidant has grown comfortable believing the story was over. Her post shatters that illusion, because to the avoidant mind, there's nothing more destabilizing than seeing the person they left kind of thrive without them. It's proof that they've lost emotional control. The paradox of the signal is that one glimpse of your happiness creates 10 times the curiosity in your absence, which kind of leads us nicely to stage 4. This is where the first cracks begin. Usually you're going to see this happen around day 30 to 45. It's typically where the avoidance defenses start to slip, and they're more likely to reach out with these awkward, clumsy messages just to test to see if the door is still open. Now, notice I said they're more likely to, not that they will reach out. It really depends on what level your avoidant is operating at. A few weeks back, I broke down what I call the 5 levels of avoidance. It's a scale that basically measures how deep their avoidance runs. Levels 1 through 3, those are your more reachable avoidance. They still have these emotional openings, even if they're kind of hiding behind distance or pride. But once the avoidant moves into levels 4 and 5, things kind of start to change. These avoidants are locked down. They've built their walls into fortresses. Now, luckily, Lee didn't have a level 4 or 5 avoidant. I want you to watch her describe her avoidant reaching out in the interview I did with her.
So keep in mind, we ended things at the end of May. And then I think mid-July, he reached out and was like, hey, I hope you had a good 4th of July. It was like July 21st.
So basically 3 weeks after July 4th, he reaches out, which is a really, really odd text message to send. Like, all right, this right here is what I like to call the first real crack. The avoidance defenses are starting to falter. So instead of a heartfelt message, what do they send? A weird, awkward, late tester text like, hey, I hope you had a good 4th of July, weeks after the holiday had already ended. That's not a real check-in. That's basically a breadcrumb. It's their way of asking, hey, if I knock on the door, are you still going to answer? Tester messages always sound a little off. They're late, they're vague, sometimes they're super random, but they're not actually random from the avoidance perspective. They're carefully chosen to let them peek through the crack in the door without fully walking inside. All right, let's move on to stage 5, the collapse of control. Usually this is going to happen around days 45 to 60. This is when the avoidant finally admits, whether directly or indirectly, that they've been watching, guessing, and flat out spiraling about your life. Also known as they're no longer able to hold the upper hand. Watch what Lee's ex had to say about that.
And I was like, yeah, things are going well. And he literally goes to me, he goes, yeah, like what's going on in your life? I've been following your social media, but it's kind of hard to read what's going on.
So for Lee, this stage kind of shows up in a pretty telling way. You know, her avoidant tries to play it casual, but ends up slipping. He flat out admits he's been following her on social media, only to complain that it was hard to read what was really going on in her life. That's the giveaway. And I want you to notice what Lee was posting. These are little glimpses, never the full picture, you know, a new apartment, night out with friends he doesn't recognize, just enough to suggest she's moving forward, but never enough to give him certainty. And that's what drives him crazy. This is that point where the avoidant no longer feels in control. They start slipping little hints, sometimes without even realizing, and admit they've been watching, guessing, and trying to piece together what's going on in your life. Obsession is fueled by ambiguity. The less they know for certain, the more their mind fills in the blanks with fear and longing. Around day 60 is where stage 6, the begging, begins. This is what I would consider to be the tipping point, where obsession flips into desperation. This is when the avoidant will break and they'll overstate your uniqueness because their fear of losing you has truly reached the peak. And Lee's ex broke down just like this.
Okay. So then, we meet up, waterworks. No other woman has ever treated me the way that you do, and I want another chance.
Notice by stage 6, the mask is gone. The avoidant who once seemed untouchable is now unraveling. Their cool front is replaced with desperation. They say whatever they can. They'll beg for another chance. They'll swear that no one else compares because their fear of permanent loss finally outweighs their pride. Of course, stage 6 for Lee came with all the drama you'd expect. Her avoidant tries to hold it together, but the mask didn't last. The moment they meet up, the waterworks start. He swears no other woman had ever treated him like the way she did, and he begs her for another chance. And that leads us to stage 7, the power shift. This is going to usually happen between 90 days to a year. All right, this is the final turn where the obsession no longer belongs to them. It's when your decision to bet on yourself and keep moving forward forces the avoidant to finally sit with the void that you've left behind. Now, I want you to see how that happened for Lee.
But if you take it from that approach, like I bet on myself that I'm so good of a person, no one else is, there's no other me in the world that they're going to feel a void. It's going to come, and whether it's 30 days, 90 days, a year, there's going to be that point where they sit there and I'm like, damn, you know what? Like, he never did this. Or
this is the exact attitude. This here. Anyone listening, this is the attitude you need to have if you want to be successful. The final stage here isn't about their pursuit. It's more about your stance. You're choosing yourself, you're refusing to shrink, you're shifting that dynamic, and they're kind of left to reckon with your irreplaceability while you've already kind of stepped into freedom. And that is the ultimate power shift, because the moment you stop centering them and you start betting on yourself is the same moment obsession takes root in them and freedom takes root in you. Look at stage 7. Lee flat out said she bet on herself, knowing that there's no one else like her in the world. And she was right. Whether it's 90 days or maybe even a year later, the avoidant will eventually feel the void she left behind. And all throughout the stages, the obsession timeline is never really about tracking them. It's about tracking you. Now, look at Lee's story. Every single turning point, the silence, the signals, the cracks, the collapse, the begging, all of it happened only because she bet on herself first. She doesn't chase. She just went quiet and she rebuilt her life. She showed these subtle glimpses of joy, but she's never desperate. And that's the real secret to the avoidant obsession timeline. It's never about what they're doing. It's always about what you stopped doing. Obsession doesn't grow in attention. It grows in absence. It doesn't bloom when you fight to stay. It blooms when you finally stop fighting. Every stage of this timeline is really just one long reflection of that single truth. The more grounded you become in your own life, the more destabilized they become in theirs.